Let's dive in. So in addition to the chat, if you have questions as we go, there's a Q&A panel. Open that up and put your questions in there. Keep any just general chat comments for the chat. Keep the Q&A for actual questions that you want answered, and we'll do our best to queue up those questions and answer as many as we can in our Q&A block at the end here. For now, I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour. Again, I'm Brian. I'm the primary pioneer of this Holacracy thing, although there's a whole lot of people involved now furthering it. And for me, this came about, I'm an entrepreneur. I've started a few companies now. One of them was a software company I started in 2001. And I started that company because I just had this driving sense, there's got to be a better way to run a company. And I didn't know what it was, but I wanted to experiment. So I created my software company as a laboratory. So we could experiment with new methods of management, new ways of organizing together, of making decisions together, of running a company together. And over time, we just started bringing in every idea, technique, process, anything we could think of that might help us run a company differently and find a better way. And over the years, we started piecing these pieces of the puzzle together into the system that is now known as Holacracy. So that's where this came from. It didn't come from a management theory. It didn't come from an academic background in the world. It came from just an organization experimenting and trying to find a practical, better way to run. Since then, it's spread. It's now there's about 1,000 organizations all over the world that are doing, excuse me, sorry, about 1,000 companies all over the world that are doing this Holacracy thing. And it's spreading pretty exponentially at this point. So let me tell a story to get us started here. I'm a pilot, so I have a private pilot's license from some time ago, and this was right back when I was building my software company and experimenting, looking for better ways. I had a flight. I was still a student pilot, and it was my first cross-country solo flight. In other words, the first time I'm flying with no instructor away from my home airport. So out of sight, I'm flying actually hundreds of miles away. And along the journey, my low voltage light came on my instrument panel. And they don't teach you much about the plane hardware, right? So I don't actually know what that means. I can kind of guess, something about it. But my first instinct after the low voltage light comes on is to check my other instruments, right? So one by one, I look through my whole instrument panel. And, my altimeter says, you're doing fine. You're not losing altitude. There's no problem. My airspeed indicator says you're not losing speed, so there's no problem, nothing to worry about. My navigation aid says you're perfectly on course, nothing's going wrong, nothing to worry about, plenty of fuel. Every other instrument says there's no problem, nothing to worry about, everything's fine. So I let the other instruments outvote the low voltage light, right? I said, it must not be that big of a problem, right? It's only one instrument that's reporting anything wrong, so I'm just gonna ignore it and keep flying, right? If it were a big problem, it would be sensed by more instruments than just one. Turns out that was a really bad decision. The low voltage light was actually tuned in to information that no other instrument had. And I nearly crashed the plane. I ended up completely lost with no electronics, no avionics, in a storm, violating international airspace. It's a really bad deal. Fortunately, I did make it down. And as I was reflecting on this, I realized this is what we do in our companies all the time. And I was doing it in my company at the time. It's often one lone person who senses something that no one else does, right? And when no one else senses it, we tend to just ignore them, outvote them. We tend to have a really hard time when we're the low voltage light driving change when no one else senses what we do. But we naturally sense different things. And sometimes it is one person sensing something that's really important for the overall flight of our organization towards its purpose. And when one person senses it, the systems around us in the traditional way we've grown businesses resist that one person driving change. Maybe you've had an experience like this yourselves. Maybe have you ever been the low voltage light in your organizations? The one person sensing something that no one else does and having a really hard time driving meaningful change as a result. So for me, this sent me on a quest wondering, all right, what is it that gets in the way of one person sensing something and driving meaningful change? And how can we get that out of the way? How can we create a different kind of system around us that makes it really easy for anything sensed by anyone, anywhere in the company, to drive improvement in that organization. I think another way I might say it, I wanted a conscious company. But what I mean by that is one where the consciousness of any individual human within could be harnessed to drive meaningful change. Because that's how our companies are conscious. It's through us. It's through us sensing things and driving change with it. And if we can't use the consciousness of every individual within, we don't have a conscious organization, whatever else we might have. So I started looking what gets in the way. And let me ask you all a question and invite you to put the answer in the chat for me. What limits useful change in organizations? When you are the low voltage light, or when someone else is in a company you know, what gets in the way? What words come to mind when you think of the obstacles, the limits to somebody driving useful change in an organization? And just type into the chat whatever pops to mind, right? I'm going to read some of the ones coming up here. I see ego. That's funny. That's usually one of the first ones that comes up. Hierarchy came up a whole bunch. Also one of the first ones that I usually get. I see politics. Yeah, that's a lot. That's there all the time. Psychological safety, for sure. Habits sometimes, even when we want change. Trust. Yeah, let's see. Red tape, bureaucracy, all that. Culture, sure. Resistance of all sorts. More bureaucracy. Sometimes just bottlenecks in decision-making, motivation, inertia, fear. Fear comes up several times here. All right, so the thing is, I hear these all the time. Every time I ask this question, it doesn't matter where in the world I'm speaking. It doesn't matter what culture I'm in. It doesn't matter whether I'm talking to big companies, small companies, for-profit, nonprofit, government. I'm hearing the same answers again and again and again. You all named virtually all of these, right? And this isn't a complete list, but it's amazing to me that almost every company in the world today suffers from most of these most of the time, right? Or at least some of these all the time. And yet we haven't solved it. So it must be a really deep issue, right? The patterns here go really, really deep. We would have solved it already. Think of the economic cost in the world today of these issues if every company in the world is suffering from them and it's limiting their ability to drive change, right? Let alone the human cost of these things, right? And when I kind of did this inquiry of what is it that's going wrong in our organizations to lead to these, I kind of came to a conclusion. I don't think it is anything exactly going wrong per se. I think rather our organizations today are perfectly designed to achieve these results. In other words, I don't think these are somehow, something is just kind of gone off the tracks. I think the tracks head right here. I think the way we've structured and built organizations make these a side effect, right? They're features in the operating system of companies, not bugs. In other words, they're built right in. They're designed for this in a way, not intentionally, but they are. Which means if we want to transcend some of these challenges, I think we need to dig really deep. We have to question the very fundamental structure we use to grow and scale organizations. Right, and let's talk about that. The way that's been done for the past century in its modern form and a lot longer in earlier forms is the management hierarchy. This is so prevalent today as a way of structuring companies that most people don't question it as a choice. I didn't. When I was starting my software company back in 2001, I never sat down with my co-founders and said, how do we want to scale our business? How do we want to scale power, which is what this really is about in our business? Do we want to centralize all power in a single role, a CEO? And do we want them to break it down, a management hierarchy, and delegate down and have it all roll back up to them? Right? Is that how we want to structure and scale power, or do we want to do it differently? And we never asked that question because we unconsciously assumed it wasn't a choice. We just assumed it was the only way to scale, right? We need scale, we need accountability, we need alignment, we need a way to break down work and specialize, right? We need the things that management hierarchy brings. And I think that's true. We do need accountability. We do need a way to scale. We do need a way to break down work. We need alignment. We need all these things. But that doesn't necessarily imply that this is the only way to get there. And it took me a while in my experimentation to realize that I think the fundamental issues that were in the way of having the conscious organization I wanted was the very structure of it. We were unconsciously defaulting to a structure that wasn't very agile, wasn't very adaptable, tended to limit change. There's a lot of obstacles to this. And that said, this structure worked great in 1950, in the middle of last century, in the heyday of the management hierarchy. The world was simple enough for this structure to be effective enough for the organizations of the day, of that era. Today, it's a different story. The world has changed a lot. The complexity our organizations face is an order of magnitude, at least more, maybe more than organizations mid-last century. The pace of change is faster than it's ever been and slower than it ever will be. It's only getting faster. Our organizations are in an environment that demands more responsiveness, more adaptability, that is bombarding them with messages, inputs from its world, way more than organizations did back then. 1950, as an executive, how many messages did you have to deal with in a day? Right? You had a few voice calls, no voicemail, right? Maybe some memos, right? Today, think of the number of messages through all channels, social media, email. We're bombarded, and not just the top, every part of the organization. I think the world is demanding more responsive, more agile forms of organization that can deal with more input, not to mention the pressure from within. We have people now that aren't just looking for a paycheck to feed their family, which may have been fine mid-last century. Now we have people that want purpose, that want meaning. Have you ever known a millennial to say, I just want a good job that lets me feed my family? Right, it just doesn't happen. And with that is, of course, the opportunity. You can harness that. There's all this potential there in the people if you give them a way to contribute. So I was looking for a more empowering organization. And I went on this quest of what other options do we have, right? If not this, if not the management hierarchy. And I think we can see a different paradigm at play in our world around us, and this is getting to the paradigm that you'll see underneath Holacracy as an alternative to the management hierarchy, which is, look at our societies. We've long ago learned in society that centralizing all economic planning at the top of a hierarchy and trying to intelligently design an economic system actually doesn't work as well as allowing self-organization, right? As a free market that allows people to simply have freedom and go about their own purpose in life and work with others. There's a framework in society. There's a framework of rules and laws that tell us how we can cooperate in a collaborative way with others, that kind of keep us operating together in a healthy framework. But within that, they don't tell you exactly where to go and who to trade with. And I can fly into any city I want nowadays and trust I can find a ride to a place to eat. I can get a meal, which, by the way, I'm using ingredients from all over the world in my salads. I eat a lot of salads. Massive global cooperation to get me a salad in a foreign city, and then a place to sleep, of course. And there's no supply chain management department figuring out how to do that. It's simply local actors using their autonomy to respond to their environment in this complex, chaotic, self-organizing system. And we get order from that. We get chaos and we get order, both. They coexist. And we do it without top-down control. We see the same in our human body. One of my favorite examples of this. There are how many trillions of cells? I forget the exact count. There's a huge number of cells in our body. And there's no CEO cell, right? There's no boss. There's no management hierarchy ordering the other cells what to do. Each cell has its own self-organizing process. There's an autonomy internal to that cell, right? And yet they're also integrated by an organ into a larger functioning unit, some larger function, higher level function. So, the heart doesn't tell the heart cells what to do. It doesn't tell them how to do their job. It doesn't direct them. It integrates their own autonomous self-organizing. They're autonomous whole pieces of a larger whole system, which, of course, the heart is itself an autonomous whole function within a larger system, a cardiovascular system, et cetera. So we see this as nature's way of dealing with complexity at scale. It isn't a command hierarchy. Rather, it's self-organizing at every level, wrapped into a larger self-organizing system. And that, in a nutshell, is the paradigm Holacracy brings into an organization. So Holacracy is an alternative to the management hierarchy. It is a replacement for the management hierarchy. At the end of the day, when you fully adopted Holacracy, and it might take some years to get there, but when you fully adopted it, you have no more anything that looks like a CEO role or power centralized at the top of the hierarchy. You have no more managers. You have no more management hierarchy. You have a different way of getting order, but you do have structure. All right? One of the common myths when I talk about this work is when you throw out the management hierarchy, you throw out all structure, which is not true at all. In Holacracy, there is more structure, not less than the management hierarchy. And just like in the human body, it's an incredibly highly structured, ordered system. It's also highly adaptable and chaotic. It's both. But it's not unstructured when we throw out hierarchy. We have a different structure, a different kind, a different way of getting to the structure than breaking it down, a management hierarchy. We still have clarity of who does what, who makes which decisions, how the work breaks down, what we expect from people, how we align. You need these things. You just don't necessarily have to get there by having a boss break it down. So you can think of this also as a very empowering system because it leaves people more autonomy, more power to adapt to their local environment. And let's talk about that and what real empowerment requires for a minute, because it requires some counterintuitive things. When I was first interested in more empowering environments, my first instinct was throw out the things that get in the way of empowerment, which are often the rules, the policies, the structure. And in most companies, these do get in the way of people just being empowered. The bureaucratic structures we're used to get in the way. But you still do need structure. You just need the right structure. Said another way, if you go to your team tomorrow and say, guess what, everyone? You're empowered. Congratulations. Good luck. You don't get an empowered team. You get a lot of people really confused because they know there are boundaries there, right? They know there's something they can't do. And you haven't told them what it is, so they're intuiting it. They're trying, right? And that's not very empowering. That's actually quite maddening. People know there are limits. And if they don't know what the limits are, they don't know what their freedom is, right? If you don't know the limits of your freedom, you don't know your freedom. If you don't know the boundaries, you don't know your autonomy. So you need these things if you want an empowering environment. People need to know exactly what they can't do because that tells them what they can do without checking with anyone, without calling a meeting and getting consensus, without running it up a management hierarchy, right? If you want people to have true autonomy, they need to know the boundaries and the limits. So a lot of the focus of Holacracy is counterintuitively giving you a lightweight, agile way to define boundaries and structures and rules and policies and all the clarity we need, the constraints, right? Because when you have a really lightweight way, an agile way of structuring those, something that makes them easy to change and adapt, right? You can get just the right ones. And then you can take a stance, which is anything that isn't against the rules, go do. Right? You have the freedom as long as you don't violate these minimally sufficient rules. So let's get more concrete and look at how that shows up. So Holacracy is a role-based system. In other words, work gets broken down into a bunch of different roles. You might fill 20 roles or 10 or 30 in an organization. So this isn't a job description. This isn't your job. This isn't one place in the structure of the company. These are little roles that you might fill lots of in lots of parts of the company. One of the things Holacracy does is free people to work in lots of different parts of the company, which is often difficult in a management hierarchy. So here's an example role that I fill. It's my spokesperson role. I'm doing it right now. Every role has a purpose in Holacracy. Holacracy is a purpose-driven system. It's all about taking a purpose for the overall organization and finding a way to break it down concretely and what we need to do to get the purpose done, and then giving people real empowerment to go do it. So I have a role that has a purpose. Tells me why my role exists and what my piece of our overall purpose is. This is one of about 30 roles for me that I fill. And my role has some accountabilities, and this tells me what's expected of me in this role, and it tells my colleagues what they can count on from me. And the golden rule of Holacracy is this. When I'm executing my role, when I'm trying to get my purpose done or my accountabilities met, I have the full authority to make any decision or take any action whatsoever, as long as there's no rule against it. I don't need permission. I don't need to socialize it and make sure others are comfortable with it. I have the autonomy and the power to use my judgment and to lead my role. I am the CEO of my role, and everyone else in the organization is the CEO of their role, right? They have ultimate command authority in their role. They don't need to check with anyone. They don't need permission. They don't need anything as long as there's no rule against it. And that means a clear, consciously created rule that is written down and documented in our company. I'll talk about how those come about in a minute. But let me call out, this is the opposite of the way most organizations today work. In most management hierarchies, the implicit operating norm is don't do anything you aren't already doing unless you get permission. And you get permission in one of two ways in most management hierarchies. One of them is run it up the command chain, ask the boss's permission or whatever. But actually the more common one is you socialize it and you make sure everyone on your team or any stakeholder is bought in to what you want to do. which is incredibly expensive and time consuming, and also ultimately disempowering. It invites you to give your power to the group, to not own and lead your role, but to say, what do we want to do here? And defer your power to some group decision. I think it's much more powerful to say, look, in my role, I want to lead this role. I need to make a decision. And I'd like your input to help me make my decision so I can lead my role, which is very different than socializing to get buy-in, to let we decide. That's me owning it and still checking in with a team if I want information to make a better decision. So this is the opposite the way most organizations work, and it's a big cultural change to leave people the freedom to lead their roles without expecting they're going to talk to everyone, socialize it, get buy-in, or run it up a management chain. Right? But when you have that, you'll have a system with a lot more entrepreneurial action, which also means more tension, because your empowered action could create some tension in my part of the company, in my role, or my empowered action could create tension in your role, right? That's going to happen. And instead of avoiding that by socializing everything, the stance in Holacracy is let's get really good at processing that, at learning from it. Let's let the tension drive change, right? So we'll come back to that in a minute, but part of the way that change is going to happen, we're going to need to clarify the boundaries. We're going to need to know sometimes, all right, sure, you're empowered in most ways, but not this way, right? Here's a rule that we need to honor. A constraint that needs to be, you do need to check in with some people sometimes, right, to keep things safe. So here's an example of how that comes about. This is another role I work with. It's my web architect role on one of the teams I'm on, same team as my spokesperson role. This role has its own purpose. It tries to keep a clear and sexy website for Holacracy and my company, Holacracy One. And this role has a domain. And think of that like the property of this role. In other words, that's telling me in my spokesperson role, I can do anything I want. I have the power to lead my role, right? But if I want to mess with the website, that's the web architect's property. And I should check in with the person filling that role. It's my colleague Olivier in that role, right? I should check in with him and make sure that I'm not going to cause harm on the website before I do anything that impacts it. Right? So we have this kind of property line, just like in society, right? I know I have the freedom to live my life as I please, to lead my life. But if I want to go take my neighbor's car to the airport, I should probably ask his permission, right? It's his property. And that means we don't need a baron breaking down who can do what and asking permission, right? We don't need to socialize all our decisions. We simply know who controls what. And that's what Holacracy brings into an organization. It's the foundation of a self-organizing system. You need to know the boundaries. So this is one example of how we can get a boundary. We can define property. The interesting thing here, there is no managers, no management hierarchy. So it doesn't matter if I'm the founder of the company. If I used to have the CEO title before we adopted Holacracy, right? I don't have command authority in the website. My colleague Olivier does in our web architect role. He is the CEO of the website, if you will, of this role. So there is no status at play here, right? I can't go command him what to do with the website. He'd kind of laugh at me, I suspect. He'd look at me and say, you don't have the authority to tell me what to do in this area. In fact, I don't have the authority to tell him what to do in his role at all, and nor does he have the authority to tell me what to do in mine. We each lead our role together. It's a very different structure than when, say, the former CEO comes and tells you what to do in a management hierarchy. That rarely do you see somebody pushing back and saying, yeah, thanks for your advice. I'll let you know what I decide. Right? Often the CEO's judgment is taken as command. And this is different now. This is a fairly significant shift in the world of Holacracy. All right, but it's not enough to have this clarity of how you break down the work and the boundaries, because you can't do all that up front. You're going to end up with a bureaucratic system. If you go in your company tomorrow and you try to define all the roles and define all the domains, the property rights, you're going to end up with a mess of bureaucracy, not a lean, agile system, because it's really difficult to define the right ones up front, which means we need a process to allow them to change over time so that we can learn what they are. Going back to the fact that one person's empowered action is another person's tension, right? Those tensions can teach us something, right? We can say, hey, your empowered action in your area is actually kind of making it harder to do my purpose. So let's learn from that what the boundaries need to be. Not what we think up front they should be, but what they actually need to be from the real work. Or let's learn what we need to expect of each other. Because with empowerment needs to come responsibility. And so we need to learn as well, what are the responsibilities we need over time, right? So Holacracy adds this governance process in every team. So this circle, we call it outreach. That's our marketing outreach circle. And this circle has the web architect role I showed you. It has my spokesperson role in it. And once every month, anyone filling a role in this team is invited to show up in this governance process, governance meeting. And there's a way to do it asynchronously between meetings as well, which works for most simple changes. But there's a defined process to this governance thing, right? There's this decision-making process. And it's designed to give everyone a voice, but without the tyranny of consensus, which is where everyone has a voice, but no decisions can get made because everyone has to agree on everything. So this governance meeting, it doesn't use consensus, but it does ensure through the process that everyone has a real voice to drive change, right? The low voltage light doesn't get outvoted. They can actually drive change to anyone else's role on the team or any policy affecting the team. And this governance meeting is done in every team, every circle, not just once at the top. Our outreach team does it. We have a training team that does our Holacracy trainings. They do their own governance meeting. We have a coaching team that provides coaching services to clients. They do their own governance meeting. Right? Every team's doing governance. And anyone filling a role on that team is invited to drive change in that process. And if you're curious to see the actual decision-making process in the meeting, it's really cool. I don't have time to go into it in this video, but we have another one that walks you through it on our website. In fact, Laura, could you post a link to that for us in the chat so people can follow up with that? We'll get that posted for you. So this governance process allows us to change roles, change other people's roles. Here's an example of how that played out. Right? This is my spokesperson role again. Let's look at the third accountability here. Right? It says defining criteria for acceptable speaking engagements. Where that came from, when we first created this role, my spokesperson role, it started out empty, right? We just had a purpose and maybe one accountability or something, right? Most roles start out lightweight and empty. But this one grew over time, and it grew from real people doing work together and learning together. So here's a true story. One day, we have another role. We call it our casting agent role. The casting agent role books my spokesperson role for talks. So I do talks all over the world at different events and conferences. We get a lot of invitations, and our casting agent has to sort through all those invitations and figure out which ones, to negotiate with, and then eventually to send me to talk for. And one day, our casting agent, many years ago, was getting really frustrated because she was spending all this time and energy negotiating with possible talks. And then at the end of the day, she'd present them to me in my spokesperson role, and I would shoot them down. I'd say, wrong market, not going to go there, or the audience isn't large enough, not worth it, or whatever. Right? So she felt totally disempowered. Imagine that. You're in her shoes, you're doing all this work, and at the end of your process, you're getting no's and wasting all this time and energy. It felt really disempowering for her. So she showed up at a governance meeting. And she said, yeah, I need to expect something from your spokesperson role. If I could expect that you were defining and showing me these criteria, right, then I could judge myself by them. I could judge for myself, and I could shoot down the ones that were off of those criteria, and then you wouldn't shoot them down at the end of my process, right? Then I would know. And it took about 3 minutes in that governance meeting for that to go from a proposal to a new expectation, new accountability on my role. And she could then turn to me and say, so when do you think you're going to have that for me by? Right? When do you project getting me a first draft of that? Right? So the interesting thing, it took 3 minutes for her to drive a change on my role, add this expectation, and be able to turn to me to say, so when do you think you're going to have that for me back? The interesting corollary, the footnote to this story, I'm the founder of the company. She was our newest hire right out of college. In what company do you know where the newest hire right out of college in 3 minutes can add an expectation onto the founder and turn to him and say, so when are you going to have that done for me by? Right? That's pretty remarkable. At least I think so. This process isn't about the status, the egos, all the politics that you'd normally have to do in a management hierarchy to make that change happen. Right? The socialization, the talking, it probably wouldn't even happen in the first place, honestly. Here, it took 3 minutes, and there was no status, weird ego stuff to it, because it's about the purpose. It's about what you need to solve the purpose of your role, right? And sometimes you need to count on things from others. And we learn that by real tensions happening in our team, right? We're driving change, not from our big picture upfront designs, but from listening to the tensions we feel. And notice I don't mean tension in a negative way here. Right? We sometimes think of these as negative, and no wonder when we have no way to drive change with them, right? But it's not. It could be an exciting opportunity. It's just the feeling. It's an experience. right? The stretching feeling you get when you sense where we are and where we could be, and there's a gap between them. The goal of holacracy, very simply, is any tension sensed by anyone anywhere in the company needs a place to go where it can get rapidly and reliably processed into meaningful change for the sake of the purpose. Right? All holacracy does is give you a framework that allows those tensions to show up and get processed somewhere. That's what governance meetings are all about. They're giving people a forum to drive change from real tensions. And ultimately, that's what the empowerment of holacracy is about. When you have the power to lead your role, it's easier to solve tension. Right? It's easier to be a conscious actor in the system, not just sensing tensions that you then have to socialize for a year, sit on. It's hard to drive change in most companies. But here, with this at play, you have the autonomy to lead your role. You have a lot of power there. You don't need to socialize things. You don't need to get buy-in. You just lead your role. You know the boundaries, so you know when you need to check with somebody or whatever. And you know how to change their roles. You know how to change the boundaries. You know how to change any policy in the organization. It's all liquid. It's fluid. It can change, driven by what's in the way of you expressing the purpose of your role. When you do that at scale, you have a totally different type of structure and system. There is no management hierarchy anymore. There doesn't need to be. We actually, in the early days of holacracy, I never set out to remove management hierarchy, ironically. I was just looking for a more empowering environment and one that, didn't have obstacles to driving change. What I discovered was when you do the empowerment thing really right, you don't need bosses anymore. You don't need to centralize power up a management hierarchy. There's simply a better way to hold it, right? And that's in a process. Governance here holds power. And governance as a process distributes it out to all of the different roles in the system. And it scales. Every circle there is doing its governance meetings. There's circles around the circles. The larger circle, our GCC or general company circle, right? That's doing its own governance meeting, which is about the boundaries between the sub-circles, right? Our outreach team and our service delivery team, or our Glassfrog team that developed the software tool that most companies doing holacracy use. That's where these screenshots came from. So each of these teams has boundaries and expectations of the other teams, and the broader circle sorts those out. Right? And then there's some links between circles that kind of flow tensions in different directions. I won't go into that in depth, but you can read about it more in my book, or there's materials on our website as well. And this scales even more. This is a screenshot of Zappos' structure at about 1,600 employees, and there's 400 or 500 circles in there, and every one of those little pixels is a role. There's thousands of them. And this is a living, breathing structure. It'll look completely different today if you looked at their structure than when I took this screenshot, right? It's living, it's organic, it's learning, it's evolving. As there's real tensions happening on every little one of those circles does its own governance process. It changes its roles, it changes its sub-circles, it changes the boundaries between them. There's a constant learning here. Right? And one last piece before I move into our summary and some Q&A that's really important here. So if you don't have power centralized in a CEO and broken down a management hierarchy, and you have it instead in a process, something else becomes really important, and that's a good rule book. Take any sport, where any sport you might play tends to have power held not in a leader at the top of a hierarchy, but in a process, right? A set of rules. And there's referees to hold to and enforce those rules, but they don't make the rules. They are simply an agent of enforcing the rules. The same is true in society. We have constitutional processes, power structures in society, rule of law. And we have courts to enforce it, of course, but ultimately power is not held in most modern societies. Ultimate power is not held in a king. It's held in a process. It's held in a structure, a rule of law. And frankly, that's what makes a sport fun to play. It's everyone's held to the same rules that aren't just in somebody else's head, right? That's what we do in our companies. The rules are held in somebody's head, and they differ based on the mood of the person when you catch them. They might differ by time of week, Monday versus Friday or whatever. And they're internally completely inconsistent. And when they're broken down, they're inconsistent in every leader, right? Like imagine if you were to try to document the actual rules at play of how power works in a typical company, say Zappos' side, 1,600 people, right? How many pages would you need in that rule book to actually document the way power really works, the rules of the game around here? And by the way, those rules would be internally inconsistent. They'd be contradictory, and it would probably take a couple of volumes. With Holacracy, there's a 20-some page rule book that is consistently applied across the whole organization that covers, here's how the governance process works. And here's how any role can drive change to any other role in the system. And by the way, here's when you have a role, here's the power you have in the role. Here's the freedom you have, the autonomy you have in the role, and here's what defines the limits of your power. All that's written down in a rule book, so that ultimately power is held in the rules of the game. It's rule of law as opposed to power held at the top of a centralized hierarchy. So that means, imagine this, if a company wants to adopt Holacracy, first, usually they try it out. We do a little 2-day workshop with a lot of executive teams where they for 2 days say, let's play as if we're playing by these rules on our executive team. We go through the governance process. We go through some other Holacracy processes. They get a taste of it. Right? But after that, after they've tried it, the next move when a company wants to adopt Holacracy, and it often happens after just a little 2-day trial, the CEO or whoever formally holds power in the company signs a declaration ceding their power into the Holacracy Constitution, the rules of the game of Holacracy. Now, they retain the power to throw it out. If it doesn't work for them and it's not expressing the purpose as well as management hierarchy did, it's the wrong system, get rid of it. Right? So they retain the ability to throw it out. But in the meantime, that CEO is giving their commitment to say, I will not violate these rules to the best of my ability, and you can hold me to them. We're all bound by the same rule set, at least until we decide it's not the right rules for us. This is where power lies. It's not in me. It's not in what I tell you. It's not in my command authority anymore. It's in the authority of the governance process and how that breaks it out to the different roles. It's a constitutional approach to running a company, which is fundamentally very different than what we see in most companies today, which is still a personal approach. Power is centralized in a person at the top of a hierarchy. Right? And broken down. It's a feudal system, really. There are barons and peasants and kings, right? This is a constitutional approach to running an organization. So, in summary, there's some major shifts here. We go from static job descriptions that frankly are pretty useless. When was the last time you ran to look at your job description to know what to do in a day, right? When was the last time you went and looked up a colleague's job description so you knew what you could fairly expect of them? That doesn't happen because they're static, they're not useful, they're removed from the people doing the work. With Holacracy, we replace that. There's no more job descriptions in that sense. There's now a collection of roles you fill. There's more clarity, though, not less. More structure, more clarity of what's really expected of you. But it's real. You use it. You do go look up your roles. You look up your colleagues' roles so you know what you can count on from them. Because those roles are the result of a learning process. They're not the result of a static design. They're the result of a team learning together what we need to count on each other for. Like my casting agent realizing they needed me to be publishing my criteria for speaking engagements, right? That came from real learning to make the whole system work better. So the roles are dynamic, they're living, they're breathing, and you feel lots of them potentially in many parts of the company. And that means instead of having authority delegated down a management hierarchy to some very vaguely defined job descriptions, we now have the ability to have a constitution that says, whatever roles we define together in our governance process, let's give them real power. Authority ultimately comes from the constitutional governance process, breaking down authority into the roles defined through that process. Which means instead of having giant reorgs every few years when somebody realizes all our job descriptions are terrible and they're getting in the way, so let's have a complete big reorg to redesign the system. Instead, we're doing micro reorgs constantly in every team. And we're doing it by iterating rapidly, driven from real tension of what are we learning working together. So we're updating those roles through the constitutional governance process by rapidly iterating through real tensions. And all of that means we can influence that process in a way we just can't in the management hierarchy. Good luck influencing the fundamental structure and policies of the organization. Honestly, as a former CEO in a management hierarchy, I felt like often I couldn't influence that stuff very effectively. And if I couldn't, I'm guaranteeing nobody else really had that much power to really drive meaningful change in those fundamental ways we organize. So we play politics. We work around it in most companies. We try to get alignment by kind of, getting people's friendly agreement. We lean on our friendships and our relationships to kind of make sure everyone's socialized in. We're bought in so we can maybe get some change. But you don't have to anymore. With Holacracy, you have a process that's simply more efficient, more effective. right? It doesn't stop people magically from ever being political, but what it does is give you a more effective channel to drive change. Right now you can show up at a governance process. And as my example was, in 3 minutes, you can get an expectation added onto the founder of the company to get your job done better. It doesn't always take 3 minutes, but it usually does, right? So we have a new way of getting alignment here through this dynamic, rapid iterating governance process, which tends to shift us from a highly political system to one that is more transpersonal. It's not about the politics and the egos anymore. It's about the purpose. It's a purpose-driven system ultimately. And that's where power ultimately stems from. So with all that said, I call this a new social technology. It's a framework that replaces management hierarchy for holding power in an organization and breaking it down. It doesn't tell you how to run your company. The Constitution has nothing to do with that. It doesn't tell you here's what specific hiring process you should have, firing process, budgeting, compensation, performance management. It doesn't tell you how to market your services. It doesn't tell you any of that stuff. That's still for you to figure out, just like it is in a management hierarchy. Management hierarchy doesn't tell you how to do those things. It just gives you a framework to build on top of. That's all Holacracy is doing. It's not replacing the hard work of uniquely crafting your business. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach to everything in your company. It's a framework that you have to build on top of. It's just one that allows more consciousness, that allows people to drive change more easily, and one that gives you more clarity to lean on and build on with clear roles throughout the system. So I call it a new social technology. Let me pause here on my main talk, and we'll take our last 15 minutes for some Q&A. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A box if you haven't already. And if you're ducking out now, thanks for joining us this far. Before I shift into the questions, just a comment for anyone that is leaving at this point. There's a lot more on the web. So if you want to dig in further into Holacracy, our website, holacracy.org, has a lot of free resources. There's also the book out there called Holacracy. You can find it wherever you buy books. And if you want a deeper dive, we do a training. And in fact, a 5-day Holacracy practitioner training that teaches you how to facilitate the governance process and the overall rules of the game here. That's a really great next step if you want to dive deeper into the learning of this. We do them all over the world. You can find the list on the website, or post that link, if you would, directly to our events page. The next one is coming up in about 2 weeks in San Francisco. After that, we've got one in Amsterdam in December. We've got Sydney, Australia in November. And Amsterdam, I mentioned December. After that, we're in Berlin in February. So check out our website for the upcoming events. If you run an organization and you want to get a taste of this, that 2-day workshop I mentioned is a great starting point. Reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you more about that. We do these little 2-day executive team in-house sessions to give people a chance to kind of dive deep into this. It's also a great way to get your whole team a taste of it. We do those. We have a network of licensed Holacracy coaches all over the world that do that in all different areas. So contact us and we can put you in touch with either a local coach if that's more appropriate for you, or us if it's the areas that we tend to focus on, or more complex engagement. We do those ourselves. So feel free to reach out if there's anything we can do to help you out with this. So with that said, let's move into our Q&A. So I'm going to get through as many questions as I can. Apologies in advance if I don't get to your question. I'll do what I can to get through as many as possible. So here's a first one. I see, how do you reward high performance? So this goes to related questions about how does compensation work and salaries and all that. And the thing is, Holacracy doesn't tell you, it doesn't give you an answer to that very intentionally. It's just a framework for answering that yourself. So let me turn it around. Have you ever had any tension in your company about the way performance management works or the way compensation works in your company? And if you have you had a clear forum to go to drive meaningful change to solve the tensions that you have? Is that easy to drive change? Or is it really difficult to enact change in those systems? The goal of Holacracy isn't to give you a perfect performance management system or compensation system. It's just to allow you to craft your own through rapid iteration and experimentation. And it's to give you a framework to link it to. So you don't have the traditional framework with management hierarchy breaking it down, but you do have a new framework. You have really clear roles that are real clarity, meaningful clarity, and you can really see what people are doing. So I don't know how you're going to do performance management or compensation, but you have more to build on top of now. You don't have managers, so you have to find some other unique approaches. But every company today doing Holacracy has their own kind of custom unique approach to performance management, compensation, and all these other processes. So I can give you just a simple example. In my company, we have a compensation system, which, because we have no managers, it's not driven to that. It's peer-to-peer. And we do it by having a bunch of badges, and badges represent skills. So you can earn a badge by two of your colleagues who already have the badge, seeing you using the skill and granting you the badge. So there's this kind of peer-to-peer process of recognizing the skillful use of skills and badging people, giving people badges, earning badges, kind of gamified, right? Your compensation then is driven by the collection of badges you have. And there's a transparent database everyone can see that says, if you earn these badges, you'll get this compensation. And if you earn those badges, you'll get that compensation, right? And that's all transparent. And the badges are earned through this peer-to-peer process. There's also processes for adding new badges into our library or adding new entries in that compensation database if you think there's a unique collection of badges that's worth something that isn't already captured. So it's a pretty cool process. It works well for us. It might not work for everybody. It works in our environment for our people. Other organizations pioneer other approaches for doing compensation or performance management. So again, the goal isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It's giving you a framework that you can build novel approaches on that might work better than the typical boss-driven compensation systems that we see in most management hierarchies. Okay, so let's see. Let's see. Oh, here's a fun one. I see this in the chat. Make sure your questions are posted in the Q&A, by the way, and not the chat, or I might miss them. But I do see one in the chat that I want to speak to. So referencing Animal Farm, Orwell gives an example of a society with abolished hierarchies. Yeah, so compare that to Holacracy. What I think you see in that is an example of what happens if you abolish all structure. It's not just abolishing hierarchy, it's abolishing any kind of clear power structure. And in my experience, if you abolish a clear power structure, you don't get high-performing conscious organization. You get a complete mess where egos and politics rule. Holacracy is not that. There is more structure, not less, than the management hierarchy. There are no group decisions. In Holacracy, decisions are made by a clear role with clear authority to make that clear decision, not a group decision process. Right? It's just broken down differently. We get to the clarity differently. So with Holacracy, you get something very different. It's actually, it feels more structured than a management hierarchy, not less. There's clarity there of who makes which decisions, more than in the management hierarchy, not less. So you get something very different. It's hard to describe the feeling of it unless you've lived it. It feels like clear, like think of a high-performing sports team, you know, with like organizational athletes, right? Like that's what Holacracy feels like to me. In a high-performing sports team, everyone has a role. They know the role's meaningful and real, right? And yet when they're leading, when they've got the ball, there's not some big meeting process with buy-in circulating and slowly moving down the field. Everyone knows they have a role to lead, and they lead their piece, and they fluidly move down that field, working within a set of rules with everyone else. Right? That's kind of more how it feels to me. All right, let's see, other questions. What is your experience introducing Holacracy in existing organizations? Is it better to introduce it quickly and efficiently, or would you suggest a gradual rollout? So I'll tell you the mistaken approach that I see, the pitfall, is trying to adopt part of Holacracy as part of a gradual rollout. It tends to backfire and sabotage you ever getting to fully adopt Holacracy, and it tends to cause a lot more harm than good. It's kind of like, imagine trying to learn soccer by adopting one of the rules of soccer and just playing by that one rule until we get really good at it, and then we'll add a second rule. You probably never get to play soccer. It probably seems like a really stupid game. And the same is true with Holacracy. This is an interwoven rule set. It's a whole system. It's not just a collection of individually useful rules. It's a new framework of rules. So you can't adopt it one rule at a time. So the way to do a gradual rollout, which you actually usually need to do in a company that is larger than about maybe 50, 60 people, the way to do a gradual rollout is not to adopt one rule at a time. It's to adopt all of Holacracy and part of the company, and let it sink in there. So you can do one team or one department, adopt all of the rules of Holacracy, the whole framework in that one team or department, let them get good at it, and then spread it and do the same in the next one. That's how Zappos got to 1,600 people. It wasn't adopting it all at once. but nor was it's adopt one rule at a time. It was, let's take a team or a department. They started with a department of about 80 people, and they got really good with it in those in those teams, and then they spread it. So if you have a smaller company, I think introducing it quickly, immediately across the whole company makes a ton of sense, and it's the easiest possible path. In a larger organization, even a fairly small but mid-sized company, you got to go team by team and just do all of the rules in one team. You can even, in a large management hierarchy, there's many in the world today that are big name brand companies that have Holacracy running in one team or one department, even when the broader company wants nothing to do with it. And that can work just fine as long as you can really adopt the framework in that company. And that usually takes a boss who has a lot of power to command their team the way they see fit, who can say, I'm going to use that power to cede my authority into the Holacracy Constitution, at least for my team. So that can work too. Can you name a few of the most successful companies using Holacracy? Yeah, so there are many out there. There's, in the US, there's Zappos, which is a name brand. They're doing really well with it. There's David Allen Company. He's the author of the book, Getting Things Done. He's also one of our board members now in my company, Holacracy One. There's even more companies in Europe than the US. I'm not as familiar with the name brands there, but bol.com is a major online retailer in the Netherlands that a lot of people have heard about. There's departments, not the whole company, but departments in many larger companies like, let's see, Ernst & Young has a team doing Holacracy. Dannon, Starwood, a lot of name brands like that have at least teams or departments doing Holacracy in them. And there are many more. There's government agencies. There's 2 government agencies in Dubai doing Holacracy. There's one department in a government agency in Washington State doing Holacracy. So it's for-profit, nonprofit, government, you name it. It's spread in all different types, shapes, and sizes of the organization or of organizations. Okay, let's see. Next up, how is the best way to test this in the current organization? Again, adopt all of it in one team. That's your best way by far. Don't try to test it by doing kind of half in, half out. That won't give you an experience of it any more than adopting half the rules of soccer will. But you can adopt it all in one team. So find a team with a leader that's really up for learning a new way to lead, which is an interesting challenge for the leader as well. But find that team that wants to really try something new and innovative, and see if that leader's game for trying it on their team. And get a coach. This is really, really difficult to adopt just by reading a book and doing it yourself. It's possible. There have been some success cases, but I think the failure rate is well over 90%, anecdotally from what I've seen. From just reading about it and doing it yourself, it's really, really hard. Like learning any complex sport, it helps to have a good coach. So get a coach if you can. There are certified coaches all over the world. Make sure they are certified licensed coaches. There's a quality control check we do on that. And there's a lot of people that really don't know how to coach Holacracy that might sell you Holacracy coaching and don't know what they're doing. So make sure they've passed that quality control check and they are certified. You can find a list of those on our website or contact us and we'll put you in touch with a local one. If you can't afford coaching, training is your next best bet. Get 1 or 2 of your own people through a training and then have them be your internal coaches to roll this out. That tends to work a lot better than a total do-it-yourself approach. So it's kind of in between. So try that. All right, what drawbacks do you see from this? Yeah, this is a huge, huge change. The drawbacks I see are less about when you get there. Once a company has made the transition, which is a multi-year journey, I don't see many drawbacks at all, except for maybe you're doing things differently, and that creates an obstacle when you are, say, bringing new people into your company. They have a learning curve to go through. Now, it can also be a draw for the right new people to join your company in the first place, but there is a drawback there. But there's very few once a company is fully up to speed. The big drawback is the change process. It's hard. This is a massive change. It's harder than any other change process I've ever been involved with. You are changing the way power works in the company, which is really deep. You're changing the way people lead and the way they follow, both. You're demanding leadership from people that are maybe used to hiding in the management hierarchy. And there's a lot in Holacracy that won't let them hide anymore, which tends to be traumatic in a lot of ways. It's a disruptive change, right? Like any disruptive technology, there's a lot that's been written about the challenges of adopting disruptive innovation. This is a disruptive social innovation. And that's the biggest drawback. from my point of view anyway. All right, let's see. With such autonomy, how do you resolve conflicts between roles? That's what the governance process is all about. And encourage you to check out that governance process video link there, and you'll get some sense of how that process plays out. So I'll leave it at that for that one. But check out the governance process. That's really about figuring out the boundaries between roles and what we expect of each other, which is really the main, the deep conflict resolution. Smaller conflicts are just resolved by whoever has the power to make the decision, right? Like if it's my role, I lead my role and I decide whatever makes sense to me, and you do the same for your role. Where we really need the deeper conflicts is in the boundaries between our roles, and that's what governance is all about. All right, so I see I have a ton more questions. Thank you. You all are really engaged a lot. I really appreciate that. I feel pain that we're at the end of our time, but I want to honor our end time. So unfortunately, I don't have time for more questions, but let me leave you with where to go if you want to get those questions answered. We have a community of practice online forums. They're free to use. Post your questions there. You're going to get a ton of responses from all different people that are living in companies doing Holacracy every day. There's about 1,000 companies out there with tens of thousands, more than that, people living in this every day. So post on that community of practice. You'll probably get a lot of interesting responses there. There's a lot of coaches that also respond to questions on there, so some skilled expertise as well. And if there's anything we can do to help you, reach out. Again, reach out, dig in, or maybe I'll see you in one of our trainings. I do many of those trainings myself. I'll be at the one in San Francisco in a couple of weeks and Amsterdam in December. So reach out or attend a training and dive in. If this is the kind of thing that excites you and you're interested in a radical new approach to organize power in a company, that is what my purpose is all about. I show people a radical new way to organize power. So I hope I've been able to do that with you. Thanks again for all the engagement. And I'll sign off now and wish you all the best. Good luck, and thanks for joining.